afternoon, everyone. My name's Aisha, this is Danny, and that's Max. And so, in everyday life, one thing we use all the time is energy. Whether it comes from fossil fuels, from natural gas, or solar energy, it's all around us constantly. Currently, we highly depend on the burning of fossil fuels for our energy source. And that is really taking a bad effect onto our environment. So, this past Tuesday, we got to do an experiment with solar cells, and we learned about how they work and how they can help us reduce the amount of fossil fuels we're using. So we built dye-sensitized solar cells, which are very inexpensive and not as effective as silicon solar cells that are used in commercial use. So they were very inexpensive. They were kind of kitchen ingredients. We used raspberry dye to coat the cell that would help absorb the light that would actually cause a reaction. And so, yeah.
Okay, so this drawing is analogous of one of the solar cells that we made. And one of the most important things to start off with is this kind of, this cycle that it goes through. A solar cell is a repeating cycle with electrons flowing through it. And in this drawing, the electrons would be, as you can see, the carts. And the artist in this drawing actually did a poorly built solar cell and a well-built solar cell. So in the poorly built solar cell, you can see that these carts are falling off and they can't get all the way to the top. This is an important concept where we need to balance voltage and amperage. Amperage is how many electrons flow through a circuit, and voltage is the difference between the energy levels of each electron. And in a poorly built circuit, many of the carts can't get to the top. This is analogous to electrons not being able to reach the higher energy levels in order to absorb the light. In a well-built circuit, there is a good balance between both the amperage and the voltage. Furthermore, I'm going to talk about the different parts of the solar cell that were shown in this drawing. So we had a lot of different parts. Some of these were not able to be included, but two of them that were this is analogous to the sun. It's what powers the entire roller coaster, and it's what allows the solar cell to actually function as it would. And this provides the energy that is then absorbed by the dye. And there is no dye in this analogy. However, here is where we can see wavelength dependency in the absorption of light. This is certain wavelengths of light cannot be absorbed by our solar cell that we made. This is because they aren't the right color or are simply reflected off of the solar cell instead of being absorbed and made into energy. This shows that not all wavelengths of light can be used in order to make a functioning solar cell, and this must be taken into account when actually creating one.
Hi. So I'm going to do a little bit of constructive criticism right now. Have a pointer? Thank you. All right.
Use different words.
Do some applauding and...
We're going to talk about the limits of this analogy.
We're going to talk about the limits of this analogy. All right. So one of the limits that we were talking about is, so there was a concept between different types of wavelength. And one of the concepts we learned is, like, how am I supposed to see something if it's not the same size? So it's kind of, the analogy that someone gave us was like, if you had a blind person that had one of their poles, if you had a beach ball at the end of it, they could sense a car, but they couldn't sense a crack in, like, the sidewalk or something, which is obviously a problem. So up here, this is actually two different types of electric current, which means that down here, this cycle was not able to work as efficiently because it wasn't the right amount of current or the amount of energy that needed for this to run. And up here, this was a good electric current for the system to be able to work. So that was good. There was certain things that were part of our solar cell experiment that we had to do. There was really fun things called iodine and titanium, and what all of this would do was we actually needed to concentrate the electron energy and find a way to actually use it. So those were not exactly super representative in this particular figure, which personally was really hard to do even when I was doing it. So that was something that I really hoped we could find a way to put on here that'd be really helpful. And that was my time, so I guess questions?
Okay, I'll start. All right, so as you said, this picture is describing basically the path of the electron in your solar cell and how you pump it up and how you have to have the right wavelength matched. Okay, so what are the nanoscience concepts that are not in this solar cell, and how could you, in this drawing, and how could you imagine putting them into this drawing?
Do you want to take it or you want me to take it?
Okay, I can take it. So one thing that we did not really touch on, that was not touched on in this drawing, was the methods for controlling the deposition of the film of the solar cell. It kind of doesn't really show how it can break down in the dye-based solar cells that we created, and it's not quite as efficient in. It doesn't maintain efficiency as a silicon commercially manufactured solar cell would.
Okay, so that's good, but my specific question is, this is a nanoscience program, and you made this solar cell in a nanoscience program, so where's the nanoscience in this solar cell? And hint, it's the answer to the same answer as everything else.
So we actually have particles that were inside our raspberry dye, and what happened was there's a really big balance in trying to get surface area to a point that's big, but without too big, so that you want to maximize the surface area and minimize the area that the cell actually takes up. And what this does, it has more ports so that the dye can actually combine to these nanoparticles, that's a word, nanoparticles, and this allows more electrons to be excited, so it actually makes the process way more efficient than it otherwise would be. So nanoscience actually helps us make this process work so much better with a lot less. Was that good?
So now your question is, imagining what would you do to this drawing to maybe put that nano concept in here? Not that I have an answer, but it's your opportunity to think on your feet.
So, you do?
Yeah, so one thing that we could do to kind of show more the nanoparticle being effective and affecting how this solar panel works could be actually to show maybe more people in the well-working roller coaster to symbolize the fact that more dye is able to bind to these particles that have more surface area per volume. And this could be one way to show how the nano roughness and the surface area actually attributes to the solar cell being more efficient than one created without nanoparticles.
Yeah, they could actually all have people in them, because even the ones with the wrong wavelength could be nano. So that would be a good idea. They could all be full of little people to be the little nano.
Any other questions?
I think as well, the illustrator also showed with the four ramps at the top, he's increasing the amount of carts that are going by, which could also represent nanotech, the use of the nanotech, because it's increasing the amount of electrons that can go through.
Somebody else has to ask a question, or I'll have to ask another question. Come on. One of you guys has to ask a question.
All right, so what we did in this lab was, I'm going to use the very shorthand version of this. So we took some particles and we took some dye, we sandwiched them together.
I just want to know how you measured after you made the cell.
Yeah. So once we sandwiched them together, we held them up in front of a projector with different color lights. So we had green, white, blue, and red, I believe. And what we used, what's the machine called? Long story short, the voltmeter, we measured voltage and amperage, and then we did a bunch of math and conversions, and we got a number, and then we compared all of our numbers together to get a line of best fit. Come on, Mom.